Today's friend is Jason Richards. Jason, what's up, man?
Not much, Jay. How we doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Of course, man. I love always having people that are experts in exercise.
Oh, I appreciate that. I don't know if I consider myself an expert, but thank you.
How many years since you started as a trainer?
About 20. Back in college, I was working at like the Summit Y, doing some stuff there. I don't even know if I was really a trainer then yet. I was kind of like a floor trainer, just kind of like working summers there.
Wow.
And then progressed that on. I was living in a town called Alamucci, working at a gym called Fit Happens.
Fit Happens. I love that
Which is a
name.
cute name.
Yeah.
But yeah, probably about 20 years. About this coming September, I guess. Yeah.
Wow. In
Yeah.
20 years. So when did you know you wanted to get into training out of college?
I think so. Like back when I was a kid playing sports, I hated lifting weights, and I would always get out of lifting weights for the teams. Like I found a way not to do it, which is probably why injuries caught up with me. But I remember, I worked for my father who had his own business, my mother and father, and I was their inside salesman for the summer.
Wow.
And my hours were 9 to 5, and eventually then I would show up at 10 and leave at 4, and then 11 leave at 3, and then everybody realized a desk job wasn't probably in my future.
Yeah.
So I kind of ran with that a little bit.
Nice. Wow. Cool. So you knew after that you wanted to go towards fitness?
Pretty much. I was the end of college where I was before I graduated. I did an extra year for teacher cert. When I graduated with exercise physiology, we all had to do an internship, and you picked whether it was cardiac rehab, personal training, and then they had this other one Parisi Speed School, which at the time just had maybe one location, and I picked that one because I was I can't watch people walking on a treadmill for 8 hours. I'll shoot myself.
Right.
So I did that, and I met it was an 8-week internship, and you just showed up there and kept your mouth shut, but you learned a lot. And they had at the time, Joe DeFranco was there, Martin Rooney, Scott Paltos, Steve Leo, Mark Williams, and a bunch of others. And I learned so much in that summer, and it kind of saw stuff I never had seen before, and that kind of started a lot of this off with kind of going that direction, which was kind of a big help because I don't know if I would have picked cardiac rehab, I don't know if I'd still be in that or what I'd be doing right now. So that was pretty cool. It kind of started everything out.
How old were you that summer?
God, was I maybe 23?
Wow.
23 with hair on my head. The world was my oyster.
and the fascination of that summer under those mentors kind of really lit it up for you.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, they were also, everybody there was pretty good. They were very good in what they did, but they were also very, they would answer questions, which wasn't kind of common back then because, they were all strength coaches, but if you asked any strength coaches, what their program was at the time, it was very secretive and hush-hush, and these guys gave answers, and, I remember, at the end of the day, pulling one of them aside, and they would answer every question until I had stopped asking questions. It didn't matter how long they were there or how many questions I had. They just kept answering questions. They would photocopy the workouts that they did for their athletes. It wasn't just with kids, but it was they were training. Some of the guys from the Giants were training there in their off season and whatnot, and they would photocopy those workouts. And I think I probably still have them in a folder at home, but that was kind of in a way unheard of back then because everything was so secretive. It was like a magic potion that these guys, they gave you information.
Well, that brings me to my next question. That was probably 2002, maybe?
Yeah, basically, yeah.
What have you seen from the early 2000s to now in 2022? What kind of progression have you seen?
In terms of the fitness industry?
Yeah.
There's you have a lot of cycles and stuff like that, and a lot of fads that come out. Like I remember the stability ball and the Bosu ball were big, and everything was like, that kind of training where it was kind of like, I can't remember the name for it that it's called, but that was a huge thing. And you even had people writing for like the NSCA and those journals about unstable training. And then, that kind of came about and went past, and then you realized you could take bits and pieces from there. Then you had a lot of things where, like, I worked at a time for like a speed agility thing, and everything was speed agility, and people came out with like, trying to copy that. I remember the kid who caught the Jeter ball, reached over the stands against Baltimore.
Yeah.
His father opened one of those facilities.
Speed and agility.
Yeah, and they kind of came and went because they didn't understand necessarily the science behind it, but those were big too, the speed agility things.
That's athlete specific, right?
Sport specific. That was a big thing for a while, and it kind of still is. And then that kind of didn't come and go. It's still around, I guess, but like, then you realize like how strength kind of plays a part in all this, and how that kind of has always stayed and progress. From 2002 to now, and as things kind of come in and come out, you realize how kind of strength is always still a part of that, or should be a part of that, no matter what your goals are for the most part.
Interesting. That strength training and that aspect when it comes to just athletes and everyday people, right?
I mean, you'll have like, majority of people, like, what are their goals? They want to look better, feel better. And then you have athletes that want to be able to run better and play their sport better. But if a lot of times, if you can put muscle on people, they're going to look better and feel better. And metabolically, they're also going to be better, because even if they go through a period of time where a period of time, maybe a few weeks where their nutrition is kind of crap, they're still going to look good or decent, comparatively speaking, if they're just doing cardio. Right. And then even with like the athlete, to run better, technique and all that stuff play a part in how they run. But if they're stronger now, they can provide force into the ground that's going to propel them. So it's kind of like, it doesn't have to be just the barbell necessarily. Right. But it's kind of like, how do you take that said individual and get them stronger? Right. Because that, in a lot of different ways, that'll help whatever they're looking to do. Right. As long as it can apply and transfer.
Yeah, that whole notion of people being confused whether it's burning calories through cardio or burning calories through building muscle in their metabolism, I just think people know a mixture is needed, but a lot of people are lost there, right?
I think so. Like, there's still like a predominant thing amongst, females and even men to some degree that like putting on muscle is going to make them bulky. It's, and too big and whatnot. And I remember like, I don't know how many years ago it was, but somebody sitting down like, I don't want to get too bulky. I want to look like you. And I was like, well, shit, I spent my whole life trying to look bulky.
That's
and it's not as easy. No. They're like, oh, I'm going to put on 20 pounds of muscle. No, you're not. Like, if you can put on 4 pounds of muscle, that's like amazing. Right. But like that's like you were saying, it's like,
it's a myth almost.
It's a myth where like a lot of people, they join a gym and the first thing they go to a lot of times is the treadmill or the bike or the elliptical, maybe just because that's what they know, but also that's what they think they need to do is just burn calories. That'll work for an extent, but then you get to a point where like your body adapts to that. So then where do you go?
Right. Then you go to resistance training, right?
And or they don't, and they just kind of like, that's where like you don't see them again until like January or September, and then they go through that again, and then it's
lose like a little weight.
Yep, because their activity level increases, but it gets to a point where like you can't really push that anymore. Right. So that's where they kind of always get stuck with. And when you add resistance training in, you can make a body composition change, and that's really what they're looking for. They just don't know the terms. Yeah. It's not necessarily weight loss. They just do want to lose weight, but they want to look better, feel better.
Right. It's a body composition transformation.
Exactly.
More so.
Yep.
Yeah. And they don't understand how to get to that next step when they've exhausted cardio.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and that's where like, you teach them like, everybody's probably going to squat, deadlift, press, but they're not necessarily always going to do it with a barbell. And they don't necessarily maybe even have to for what they're looking to do. Like their squat could be like a goblet squat or a goblet box squat. Their deadlift could be like maybe just a simple hinge and then a push-up to start. And then you progress them as they go and as what they're looking to do, more or less.
Yeah, yeah. No, but that myth that females don't want to get bulky, I don't know if you remember Christian Mendez. We had different shifts. I know we were morning, he was afternoon.
He used to come there every once in a while in the morning,
Yeah. But he said he had, like we all have clients that are females and they say, all right, but listen, I don't want to get bulky and muscular. And Christian said, you see all these males, all these guys, how many of them are bulky and muscular? And the client went, 2, 3. He's like, they're all actively trying to get bulky.
Exactly. Yes. I mean, yeah.
Right.
I mean, that person who said like that about me, I was like, it was like an insult. I was like, I've spent my whole life trying to look like that.
Yeah, like you're not crazy bulky, yeah, but I actively try to get bulky.
Yeah, it's not easy. I mean, you have to you got to dedicate yourself to that to a degree.
Definitely. So, what would you say after 20-ish years of training? What are the majority of the people you meet with? I know you meet with the whole spectrum.
Right now, it's mostly like that person in their 40s, 50s, maybe who have done this before, haven't, but they're looking to get into it or back into it with maybe some 1 or 2 joint issues. So there's a movement aspect too that kind of isn't there. Here and there, right now, I'm starting to get more of the athlete kid from Robbinsville and West Windsor, but predominantly the person who's looking to kind of lose weight and kind of move a little bit better.
Yeah, that's what a lot of people don't think about. And I mean, I was a trainer and I still don't think about it all the time is, are you assessing how you feel? Like there's probably some movement issues, but we're not conscious of them, right?
I mean, your body's going to adapt into how it needs to kind of go about for every day. That's why, everybody uses like some sort of assessment the first time you meet a client, and FMS is pretty big. And it's not bad. It brings like talking points and stuff like that. But even like every day when you meet that person, that's like you're assessing when they're walking in towards you. So you're seeing how they walk, you're seeing body language, verbal cues, nonverbal cues, because that's going to go about dictating what they necessarily do that session.
Yeah.
And what you have to do. So with programming and stuff like that for the everyday person, you can program in advance like weeks ahead, but a lot of times, you better be ready to kind of crumble that piece of paper up and throw it out. And adapt, because you may have somebody on there who has gotten into, say, like a barbell squat, and that day you're watching them walk towards you and there's a little hitch in their giddy up, and maybe that's not maybe it can be corrected through their warm up and whatnot, but maybe that's the day to take the barbell off them and maybe still squat but not load their spine. Or if they have been, beat up throughout the week, maybe you take the squat away and it's more of a movement accessory recovery day. So depending upon what you see, but you're always assessing. And I think that's the one thing people don't realize is you're constantly assessing, and that's what dictates what you're going to do that session, and so forth.
Wow. Yeah, I agree. How do people look for that in themselves though?
That's tough. You got to kind of it's not tough, but that's where you kind of really got to almost be honest with yourself, which in my circumstance, I'm never good with myself. That's why I always had somebody doing my nutrition and my training at a certain point in my life. But there's a few people that can do that. And it's just, it depends upon how honest you can be with yourself.
Yeah.
And if you're willing to kind of really give yourself what you need instead of doing what you want.
Yeah, I think the select few people that can do that have a healthy relationship with exercise.
Yes,
You know,
exactly. Yes.
they can take days off. And for
Yeah.
the people like us that have a hard time taking days off, you feel like it's that. You feel like you're not doing anything.
Well, it gets people sometimes, and I'm no different, you want to do what you want to do.
Yeah.
Not necessarily what you need to do.
Yeah.
So maybe that day, that would be a better active recovery day. Maybe, instead of like beating yourself over the head
Right.
with like training,
Right.
but it sounds easier than it is. And a lot of people are like, yeah, why can't you just do that? And it's like, I probably should be able to do, but
Yeah.
like that's the same reason why people like, how many people get into training later in their 30s and 40s because they didn't want to do it when they were younger, but they realize they have to do it now. And to flip that around, it's like how many people, like, myself, people look at me as like a weirdo because I like going to the gym and working out. And it's, the complete opposite. Like I should probably take days off, but it's hard.
It is hard. It is hard. How have you battled any injuries?
Yeah. I had a lot of them growing up as a kid with sports, literally with spraining both ankles a number of times, tearing both cartilage in the right and left knee, MCL in the left knee, hamstring pulls, tricep tears, dislocated shoulder, broken wrist and hand, slap tear, and then I just got over a hernia surgery.
How was the hernia surgery?
It was better than I thought it was going to be.
Wow.
Better than the shoulder surgery was.
Yeah.
Recovery, it was what it was, but it wasn't to the point where I was like just debilitated.
Yeah. How can you tell people about bouncing back too fast from injuries or too quickly from injuries and how that can kind of set you back even further?
I mean, there's two approaches to rehab. Some people are very aggressive with it out of the box, and other people are a little bit slow. And there's probably like anything else, like that middle ground that you got to find. And then it depends on the injury. Like, did the injury require surgery? Did it require rest? Was there rehabilitation afterwards with either surgery or rest? And then how do you take that movement and either regress it or take it away at that point and then add it back in? So like,
take your shoulder, for example.
Yeah. So like certain things, like I had to kind of like, when I came back, it wasn't about strength training. When I got out of the sling, it was about passive range of motion and active range of motion. And I had to regain that for a bit. And then like you start to strengthen movements with the shoulder blade, the rotator cuff. You kind of get some movements in where you're pushing, but you maybe find a way to take off the bottom part of a press or make it a little bit easier on the joint itself. And then you just slowly progress that back in depending upon where it goes. Well, you also have to expect that like there's going to be setbacks with that as well, and you just adjust.
Yeah, you were a big help when I tore my pec and got it repaired, talking me through that. So I appreciate that a lot.
Oh, no worries, man. That's a tough injury to go through. But a lot of it's more mental than anything else.
Like, I want to touch on that mental
aspect.
Stuff. Yeah.
Like, and that kind of comes about with like, you gotta, no matter what it is you do, you kind of always have to have people that like a sounding board that around you that can kind of keep you level-headed in a way, because at a certain point, everybody needs that.
Yeah.
Whether it's like going through an injury or just a tough point in life, if you have those few people who are a sounding board, they can kind of ground you. And that I think that helps a little bit, especially with injuries and the mental aspect.
Yeah, that mental aspect is something I don't think a lot of people think about, because when they're recovering from an injury, they're only thinking physical. They want to get better physically. I'm hurt physically. Yep. Right? But the mental aspect is almost like equal to the physical rehab.
Yeah, agreed. Because especially like if you come out of surgery, like there's going to be aches and pains from it. And a lot of times you can take that as being like, ow, I hurt, or like I'm going backwards, or as a point of, instead of like, oh, this happens. And like, it's funny, like a lot of those little aches and pains, just by your mindset, you can change them. Right. With how your brain functions. Right. Like you don't realize that until you go through it.
That's right.
And then like you take that bad day and realize the next day with a good day, that bad day wasn't so bad.
Right. Perspective on it.
It's all perspective, yeah.
Yeah. I think it's a great metaphor for life, right? When you go through an injury in a rehab and you've been through it multiple times, how it's like, well, the sling, man. Every time you see someone in a sling, you're like,
I have flashbacks.
Yeah,
I remember
flashbacks.
because I'm right-handed, so I was in a sling with my right hand for 4 weeks.
Yep.
And just stupid things like, the first time I went to wipe my ass with my left hand, I almost fall off the toilet. Like,
you never do it.
Stuff
you
like
never
that.
do it.
You can't brush your teeth or eat.
I know.
Like your shoulder aches.
Eating with a fork is brutal.
So you pouring a cup of coffee with your
spilling it.
Other hand. It's
everywhere.
It's a crazy day.
Yeah, I remember you warned me that sleeping was going to be rough.
Yeah, I mean, I remember. God, the way my shoulder was with afterwards. I don't think I slept in a reclining chair for probably about 2 months.
Wow.
And it was fine. I could go to sleep, but I look back and I was like, my God, I didn't even lay down in bed.
That sleep was not quality as
not so
it could
much.
be, no.
Yeah. I mean, in the beginning, it wasn't bad because your body's recovering.
Right.
So you could fall asleep on this table here.
Right.
But it's something to kind of you look back on. And you're like, man, that was
weird. Because people don't realize that, like when you have shoulder or chest injuries and you're in a sling, or even if you're not, when you're laying down, your elbows and your shoulders are dropping back.
Yeah.
And that creates pressure.
Oh, yeah. And it just even trying to lay down in bed with that when it was tight, you just feel all that pressure there, and I couldn't even get down into bed for a while.
Right. And then you have your sling pressing on your ribs while you're sleeping.
And then when you come out of that sling, a lot of times your shoulders tight, your hips may shift in a direction because that's how you kind of walked.
Yeah.
It's a lot. I mean, but I think the hardest thing to remember is it's temporary.
Right.
And if you can kind of remember that'll kind of bounce you through it a little bit more.
Definitely. Yeah. You told me early on, you're going to have to go for active release technique at some point.
Some sort of tissue work. Yeah.
Yeah. And I came back to you a couple months in, and you said, how's it going? I said, I'm building strength. And you said, F building strength. Have you got an ART? And I said, no. And you're like, okay, you have to. I said, okay, I have to. Mm-hmm. And I'll give you so much credit, man. After the first session, it was day and night. I felt so much. One session.
Breaking scar tissue
Breaking it up.
Yeah. And that's the other part of it is as you recover with it, things may still feel crap because you're laying scar. When tissue gets laid down, it's not necessarily in lines with muscle. It's almost like a bowl of spaghetti, and it gets laid down like that, and you got to break that scar tissue down so it can be put down again. And it's a process.
Wow. Yeah. It just. And the other thing people probably say to you, and they said to me, it's never going to be exactly the same, right? Pre-injury.
Yeah, I mean, once you go into a joint to repair it, it's never going to be 100%.
Right.
I mean, even you look at my shoulder now with range of motion, I'm not at 100% range of motion because of how tight he made the capsule, so I wouldn't have to see him again.
Interesting.
And it took a lot of time to get range of motion to build back, but you kind of you play where the ball lies, I guess, as you go forward.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. What is your opinion, and can you give some people knowledge on stretching versus foam rolling? Are both needed, and if they are, daily?
I mean, there's a lot of stuff where people kind of poo-poo static stretching. I don't think it's necessarily bad. I think it depends what you're stretching. And I think that's the biggest thing that it's hard to figure out. With people who have tight hips and they're constantly sitting a lot and they have hip flexors that are tight.
Like a normal 9-to-5er.
Exactly. Their hip flexors may be tight. Their adductors or groin may be tight, but they feel it in their hamstrings because of where the pelvis sits. So they're constantly stretching their hamstrings and it never gets better. So it depends upon you got to figure out what's tight and then what to stretch. But a lot of that kind of goes along with, foam rolling, which can help get blood through certain muscle to help certain things feel better. So I think they can kind of go hand in hand. I think the key for everybody is it can't be like a half hour or 45-minute process every day. 'Cause you're probably not going to do it at that point or commit to it. It's got to be something that it's easy enough to do, but also get you off the couch. Because a lot of it can be done while you're watching TV, but what gets you off from the couch to the floor to actually do it at the end of the day?
Right.
It's got to be something that like you can feel better and it's not too hard to do.
Right.
So that's where a lot of things kind of come across of how you get assessed, but also kind of knowing how to correct it yourself.
Yeah.
Because a lot of it, movement's going to help, or not cure, but it's going to help a lot of things. So that, being active, that's where a lot of like getting steps in for the day for people have become a big thing.
Hitting that 10,000.
Yeah. And it's not necessarily they have to get to 10,000, but where are they and where, like how much active are they now comparatively speaking to last week or yesterday?
I think that's the whole goal of counting your steps, right?
Yeah.
Is not to hit a number, but just the medicine through the movement.
Exactly. Because, one, that can beat you up too. You go from 2,000 steps a day to 10,000 steps a day.
Yeah.
You're probably not going to feel great the next day.
Yeah.
But also, what are those steps? Like, are you just aimlessly walking around your kitchen?
To get the number?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or is, like, those steps somewhat meaningful in intent? Which, like, with a lot of exercise, what's the intent behind it?
Right.
And that's going to kind of a lot of time yield the benefits.
Definitely.
But
what's been kind of in your brain lately? Any exercise-based ideas maybe you've come across that you've been experimenting with maybe in your own life?
It's funny because I guess at one point stuff like machines was frowned upon.
Yeah.
And now
sorry to interrupt, but because they kind of cradle you and they're training wheels to an extent.
Yeah, and it's always like described as being non-functional.
Yeah.
And I don't know if, depending upon what your goals are, like if you look at social media and a lot of bodybuilders, a lot of them just use machines nowadays, and they might have not built that physique with just machines, but they use machines now because it provides stability, so they're less likely to probably get hurt, which allows them to kind of train and get stronger, especially as they get older.
And then people see that.
And it's a lot of them, if you follow them on Instagram or something like that, you'll see their workouts. And a lot of times, like, they don't touch a free weight or anything like that. It's all machine based for the most part.
Right.
And they still are able to get stronger and bigger and whatever they're looking to do because it's a progressive overload that they're applying. But like, I kind of always look back, and I was never all machine based, but I always thought there was a place for it. And that just kind of like, as you get beat up and stuff like that, and get older especially, a lot of people, like when you look at like an incline dumbbell press per se, the hardest part is actually getting the dumbbells up
right
to actually press it.
That's a good point.
Which when you're 20 something, you don't think about.
No.
But when you're 50 or something like that,
right.
You think about, because now it's like, well, I got to kick these up with my knees and my hips,
right.
And I got to make sure my shoulders are in position that actually feels good when I do it.
Right.
Instead of actually just taking the pin, putting it there, and getting the handles set.
That's a great point.
And it sounds stupid like that, but like you realize that everything has a place as you get older, and like nothing really is better or worse. It kind of just is, depending upon your goal.
So it sounds like if you want to do more weight, machines might help as well, because you might want to get the stability of a dumbbell incline press, so maybe you drop the weight. But if you want to get progressive overload more and you want to do a little more weight, you might have to revert to the machines.
I think it depends on the person, and what their injury history is, and what also like what they're looking to do and what they have access to do. A lot of people will use, especially like in the past few years, they'll use dumbbells and barbells and even push-ups because they didn't have access to a machine or a cable.
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily a bad thing,
right,
to use something like that, especially if you're trying to target something that's weak, because then you can just hammer it. Right. So that kind of like in a lot of ways reconfirmed that. Like literally the last year I joined a gym that's like 5 minutes from my house. And it's like it's a Globo gym, and the people watching is phenomenal, which is one of the reasons I joined that, because I haven't gotten to people watch much since I left Hoboken. But it also has a lot of machines. And it kind of was fun to use some of those machines again that I haven't used in years.
What are a couple of them you like?
Certain chest presses, certain lateral, certain arm machines, certain leg machines.
Yeah.
Because you don't have to think. You just line the machine up, you sit there, and it's not like it's mindless, but it takes a lot of you're still working, but it takes a lot of the work out of it. With having to, it sounds lazy, but drag things in place and stuff like that.
Yeah. It's a workout to get your workout prepped.
Exactly, yeah. And then it's also I noticed it's a lot easier to get some of the stuff done, because you go to a gym and everybody's on the bench press. You're never going to, it's hard to find.
That's right.
There you can find whatever chest machine you want to do if that's what you're looking to do.
That's right.
So it kind of allows you to still train, but not kill you.
Yeah, but you have so much experience, so you know the difference between putting in a good effort and not. The risk probably runs with people that don't know that and can't discern between the two.
It can. I mean, one of the reasons with all the injuries I've had right now is I didn't know necessarily when I was younger, hey, maybe this would be a good idea to back off. But you kind of need that time in your life where you train hard and maybe you're stupid. And hopefully that period is of your being stupid is small. So you realize going forward, okay, I don't need to necessarily do this, but this is what's hard. And then when you you know how to push, but you can still kind of keep things maybe in the tank somewhat to allow for more, or allow you to push to a point where you're okay, that's good there.
Yeah.
And I think that's how, if you get older and you kind of don't have those injuries, but you had that period of point in your life where you did have the injuries, that's going to allow you to kind of continue to progress as you get older.
Yeah.
Because now you can kind of do things differently in some ways, maybe you even have to, out of necessity to still allow progress.
Right. So learning how to push yourself and having that period in your life benefits you, because when you get older and you start to break down a bit, you know how to do that, essentially.
Exactly.
In a different way, because you're older with different body ailments.
100%. You can still do certain, a lot of it, if your goal is to get bigger, then a lot of it is how you keep tension and then progressive overload. So it's not necessarily just flinging stuff from point A to point B. It's how you keep tension on that area and then move it back, through that space and that range that you have.
Right. Yeah. I think a lot of people, especially when you're younger, right, in your 20s, late teens and early mid-20s, get obsessed with numbers and exercises.
Yeah.
They think that certain exercises are cement.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, certain things like the bench press, it's a great movement for strength, but does it really, if you're looking to get necessarily bigger or get your chest stronger or hypertrophy, it doesn't necessarily just focus on that. And there might be better things to do besides that. Even on some days, chasing a number, like you were saying, I think that's the biggest thing. People have an issue is they did 5 reps on it this week. They think they have to do more weight next week or more reps with it. And they do, but it's not always going to work linear. Nothing really just keeps going up, or eventually, you'd bench press 1,000 pounds or whatever. Things kind of ebb and flow and they wave. So as you get more weight and stronger this week, the following week, you may not hit that number or get those reps. It doesn't necessarily mean you got weaker, but it's adaptation that's taking place. And that lets you know when you kind of have to back off a little bit for recovery and then push again.
Yeah, can you explain to people adaptation and this whole principle of eventually your body gets used to it and doesn't have to work as hard?
I mean, kind of like what I was saying before, nothing's linear. Everything's going to kind of peak and valley. So that's where it kind of comes into play, where you take movements out at certain times that maybe you don't have to, but I think for joint health, if you change angles, maybe for a while you've been bench pressing or flat bench pushing, and then you change the angle to an incline, and it doesn't, I mean, yeah, it's going to, people say it now hits upper pec, but it's going to be a different area of the shoulder that kind of gets stressed, so it's a different pressure point in the joint. So like you don't overuse certain areas in the joint that you can kind of keep cycling back and forth.
Interesting.
As far as like, I mean, you can keep the same movements in. There's people that when they program, they'll keep those same movements in for kind of ever, but they do it in a few different ways to where they'll have maybe like if for upper body per se, whether it's upper push or just upper, they'll have 3 or 4 different workouts that they cycle through. And that kind of does that in itself. So you're not hitting the same movement every time, but you can kind of still stay with that movement and progress with it to kind of take what you get for 6 reps and eventually get it for 8 or 7 actually, and then 8 to make progress with that. But if you kind of are able to change those pressure points, you'll kind of possibly have a little more longevity as you get older. And those little aches and pains, tendonitis and stuff like that, that kind of maybe can be, held at bay. If that answered the question.
It did.
Okay.
Yeah. No, that was good. So it sounds like you're saying, and I agree with this wholeheartedly, that instead of it being linear and a straight road, the detours that you have to take on your programming are necessary in order for A, longevity, and B, maybe even for progression.
Yeah. I mean, I think you can stay with certain rep ranges, like say 6 to 10, and push those forever. But then it comes back to how disciplined are you to, one, understand when you're not pushing reps where it gets sloppy. So instead of getting 6 reps that day with that same weight, you'll take 5 instead of pushing to 6 or 7 to where it's like now you're kind of compromising stuff.
Right.
So instead of doing that, maybe you have different rep ranges that you kind of get stronger in, whatever the movement may be.
Right.
Maybe it's like a row, for example, and you have that same movement that you've been doing for 10, but now eventually you drop the weight and try to get stronger in that 12 to 15 or even 20 to 25 range, and now you push that.
That's a detour.
Yeah, in a way.
In a way.
Now what you're going to do is, in a lot of ways for people, is it just changes things around. Like if you've been doing sets of 6 for a while, you probably don't know what you can get for 20. So it's true. And it keeps people interested.
Right.
So how many, you can stay with the same reps or work exercises forever, but like the monotony of it, it takes a disciplined person to stay with that for like 3 years or longer.
That's so true.
And how bored do they get doing that? Even for somebody who wants to be physically active, it just kind of gets mundane and they go through the motions. But if you can kind of make it a game, because that's what all this is, it's a game.
Right.
That you can kind of beat things and play around with different things.
Absolutely.
You'll kind of, I think, progress in a way where you'll go closer to your goals, but you'll also kind of have happy joints.
Happy joints, happy life.
Exactly.
That's interesting how you can mess with rep ranges, set ranges, right? Different modalities of the same exercise, different planes.
Even drop rest time.
Drop rest time.
Yep.
Right? The frequency of how often you do it.
Yep.
But that's for strength training, right? And resistance training. Can you give any advice for how people can not get bored and how people can take detours for losing weight? So on your weight loss journey, how do you stay, I don't want to say interested, but strong and interested maybe? Weight loss?
I mean, the first thing with that's going to be nutrition. So it doesn't have to be, I think the one thing with nutrition that people don't realize is it's probably isn't and ever going to be 100% compliant. Like it's just not going to be like that unless your goal is to get up on stage.
Right. What do you mean? What do you mean for the people that don't know compliant? What do you mean by that?
So like if you get a nutritional plan, there's got to be some sort of way where they can still live life. Like it's not going to be 100% clean eating all the time. Now, maybe if they start further back away from their goal, there's a period of time where it has to be. Like if you're 400 pounds and you need to drop weight, you probably had enough cheat meals to get to 400 pounds. So you're going to probably have to stay a little more compliant in the beginning for a longer than somebody who is 160 pounds and looking to get to 145, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. Yeah.
But especially like, who is that person? Like, are they a mother of 4 where, they're working as well? They have work dinners or work functions. They go away on vacation with kids. They need some downtime to de-stress. You got to almost plan like there's, 90% compliance, because you can still make progress in weight loss on 90%, allowing a 10% kind of like whatever, where you live your life. So maybe that 10% is you allow them to have, or not allow them, but they have like pizza on a Friday night. Maybe they have a few drinks throughout the week. But there's discipline that you kind of install in them to lead to habits, which will kind of, go from week to week, where they can eventually figure out compliance. And it's not like that pizza leads to now a weekend of whatever, and then another week of whatever. And now before they know it, they're 402 pounds. Instead of 4, you know what I mean?
Right.
So it's kind of like a lot of it's, it took me, when I was a kid training, it took me a while to realize that like nobody's going to be 100% compliant with nutrition. And if you try to hold people to 100% compliance like that, you're probably not going to have clients that stand around with you.
It's true.
Like, because they still
hate you.
They still have to live life.
Yeah.
So like, how do you build that in and still kind of let them kind of go about their weekend or their days, but get them back on track?
Yeah, I that's so important. 100% compliance isn't realistic for almost anyone.
No, unless you're going to be up on stage, tanned out in like a banana hammock.
Yeah.
Like that's just, you don't have to be. Like there's a big difference between doing that and going to the beach and taking your shirt off and feeling comfortable.
Right.
Like those are worlds apart.
That's true.
So how do you kind of steer toward that without trying to make everybody like a bodybuilder?
Right. So that little bit of moderation, maybe 10% moderation, is what helps people stay on the journey for weight loss?
I think so. But a lot of it is like, there's, whether it's nutrition or training or anything else, it's like, what kind of discipline does that person have? Because that discipline is going to develop habits. So like, if you even look at like the January crowd that always comes into the gym, like, they're probably out by sometime in March because they're injured or whatever. But a lot of times, like that person doesn't necessarily they don't have the habits to be successful doing that because they haven't had any discipline in that area. Like they're probably, the other parts of their life, they're probably very good in.
Right.
But that aspect of it, maybe they don't like, or they just don't understand.
Right.
But a lot of it is like, maybe they haven't been educated.
Yeah.
Because like, as far as like training goes, like how many times would you train somebody a week? Like 1 to 2 times? Yeah,
3 at the most.
So like, that's 1 to 3 hours a week, but there's like 165. If you're training somebody 3 hours a week, there's 165 hours left in that week
that you don't see them.
Yeah. So that those 3 hours are never going to be greater than those 165. And you kind of almost, you're not going to see them necessarily unless they're, you're friends with them.
Right.
Those other 165 hours necessarily. So how do you teach them what to do when they're not with you and, by themselves if weight loss is a goal?
Would you say that's more important or as important?
I would say it is more. I mean, I'm not saying the 3 hours that, you should just be sitting there playing cards.
Right.
But, you're teaching them stuff, and that's going to lead eventually to where, like if you're training them once or twice a week, that'll lead them eventually to doing where they can do stuff on their own, or even 3 times a week eventually where they can do stuff on their own, because they still have to do stuff throughout the week if weight loss is a goal.
Right.
Even as they get older, and if strength is a goal, they still have to do stuff to recover or to kind of get things feeling right.
Yeah.
But what are you doing with that time to kind of educate them of what they should be doing outside of here? Because if nutrition doesn't fall into play,
right,
those 3 hours aren't going to do anything for weight loss at some point.
It's true.
So it's a process. It's not just like it's not the time that you spend with them. It's the time necessarily you don't spend with them that's going to kind of lead them to their goals, which they don't understand.
Interesting.
Because they might buy a package for like, say 8 to 10 sessions. And that's like, roughly about a month, 5 weeks of training right there. But it takes like 6 weeks, about 6 to 8 weeks for a training effect to take place. So what,
month and a half to 2 months.
If their goal is weight loss, a month right there, they might just be learning getting the understanding of how to get tension in certain places to get better movement and to progress that movement, or even kind of like getting certain things with nutrition in place to go forward. It's not all going to happen in that first time there, but how do you progress things forward?
Right.
And then how do you teach them?
Right.
Because that's where they're going to make those great improvements kind of going forward.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. It's so important to have that moderation,
Yeah, and that's also another thing that you have to teach them too with nutrition. Like, one bad meal or one cheat meal or even one day, it's not going to be the end of the world necessarily.
No.
Like, yeah, just have the discipline to like pick it back up.
Right.
Where you left off.
Right.
Because like in the grand scheme of things of a month, one day isn't going to make that big of a difference.
No.
Even one meal. But how, that can fall off from that day for weeks right there. And then that does make a difference.
Right. So I think I've heard it said that you are your habits, right? Mm-hmm. So you're going to fall back on the habits you've created.
Sure.
So what you're saying is you better develop those habits, especially when you're working with someone, whether it's a trainer-client relationship you're ultimately going to revert back to your habits.
Sure.
So if you build good ones, you'll be better off in the future.
Yeah. And it's not easy. I mean, whatever it is, you fall back to what you're comfortable doing.
Right.
So, that's where like a lot of that, I think, if the focus is on building discipline and habits there in the beginning, you're going to get better results down the road. It just might be in that beginning part right there. It's kind of a little rough to do.
Right. It is rough because it's new territory, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. I think people, you hit the nail on the head. I think people just need to learn how to be someone. Like that's their being. Be someone who blank.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep. And I mean, that's where like, if granted, we're not nutritionists as trainers, but if you don't cover that aspect of it, you're never going to get that person likely to what their goal is. So nutrition has to be covered. And that's where like maybe a food journal is important because now that kind of holds accountability when you don't see them to where like, they can lie about it and write whatever they want. But if they're saying that they're eating celery and drinking water and they've put on 10 pounds in like a month,
you're gonna know it's some water mixed with
okay, what are you doing
soda
there? Exactly.
and milkshakes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So it kind of like holds them accountable as well.
Yeah.
So it's like kind of like, and that's really what they're purchasing.
Right.
They're not necessarily purchasing like 5 sessions or 10 sessions. They're purchasing a program that needs to kind of be related to what they need, what their goals are, and everything kind of has to be put in together, whether it's nutrition, sleep, training, and all of such.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm wondering if you can give people one last piece of information before we wrap this up.
Sure.
Over, let's say, 20 years, right? You've been working with so many people and helping to change lives, which is incredible. As a coach and a trainer, what do you see people struggling with to a point where it's painful and it hurts them? Like you've recognized this actually hurts a lot of clients I've met.
Physically
or mentally. Could be mentally. Like they come to you and you're like, these clients really struggle with this and it deters them. Psychological things deter them.
Yeah.
What are those psychological barriers?
I mean, I think a lot of it can be weight loss. There's a lot of how many people just have a tough time mentally right now. Yeah. So like that person may be very successful in what they do, but it's kind of like they see a certain thing. Whether it's, they have weight that hasn't come off them in years. Yeah. And that can, a lot of times that's the struggle in itself right there. That they they are who they think they are in that sense. And that, I don't know if I was that great in my 20s at dealing with that, because like I don't know anything about that. And I'm a 20-year-old kid who kind of like,
has it going for him.
Well, has his own ego first of all.
Right, you're worried about yourself more.
Says what he says,
right.
And like I can't relate to a 40-year-old
who's
50-year-old.
overweight
exactly.
and wants to lose weight.
Necessarily. So,
right.
But as you get older and see more things and deal with more things, you realize that like a lot of this, with coaching isn't necessarily the physical aspect, but it's kind of like how you deal with them in a certain way with words, and also kind of like, even compliment them. I'm not one to, I don't compliment everybody on everything they do.
Right.
Which I don't know, maybe that's just, I don't know why, but I think like the one thing I've heard from people is like when I do compliment them, they're like, holy shit. Because like,
you don't give them out like candy.
No.
They earn your compliments.
Yeah. And maybe I don't know.
Everyone has a different.
I want to see them kind of like, I always want to see my, clients and people succeed.
Right.
But I think like, when you see real progress, that's when you really have to kind of acknowledge it, because maybe they don't see that. And like, especially something like weight loss, it might be just in the beginning in their face. And they don't see that because they see themselves every morning when they're brushing their teeth, at night, or washing their face.
They don't see it.
But you can see it.
And you give them that affirmation. You're doing a great job.
Yeah. And it's not, and then again, it's not always about like what the scale says.
Right.
It is, but it isn't. Like, somebody's clothes may be fitting different, but they weigh the same. And they're like,
right.
Well, I haven't lost any weight. Well, yeah, but you dropped 2 pant sizes.
Yeah.
So that's,
it's a great job.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a great job.
And
that's
you got to call that out for them to, so they can see that themselves. And also, because it's a journey, all this.
Right.
Fitness doesn't really stop, and maybe that's the hardest part for people to hear sometimes. Is like they don't cross a goal line.
Right.
But the goals maybe change.
Interesting. Man. Thank you for dropping those gems, dude. I think a lot of people could take away a lot of exercise-related gems from this.
Oh, thank you.
Jason Richards.
Thanks, man.
My man. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Thanks for giving people your expertise. And
no problem.
Love to have you back.
Yeah, for sure, man. Let me know.
My man.
Cool, buddy.